It's 1933, and Albert Einstein is staring down a death sentence. Not from disease, not from age, but from the Nazis. Germany's most famous mind is on the move, ducking cameras, canceling lectures, burning bridges. He's not just leaving a country, he's abandoning an entire identity. The man who redefined time and space has become a political fugitive overnight. As Adolf Hitler rises to power, Einstein's face appears in German newspapers under headlines that call him a traitor to the fatherland. His home is raided. His name is erased from academic institutions. One German magazine publishes a wanted dead poster with his photo and a $5,000 bounty. Another labels his physics Jewish science and suggests hanging him in public. Einstein? He writes a letter of resignation to the Prussian Academy from a steamer bound for America. He will never return to his homeland again. But here's the twist. This isn't just some academic caught in a bad moment of history. Einstein is being watched by everyone, and not just the Nazis. The FBI, British intelligence, and Soviet agents all want to know. What does he know? What can he build? And more urgently, who is he loyal to? Because this isn't just about physics anymore. This is about power. And the quiet, unassuming man with the frizzy hair and mismatched socks. He's now one of the most dangerous men on Earth, not because he wants to be, but because knowledge, in the wrong hands, is more volatile than any bomb. What most people don't realize is that Einstein's escape wasn't graceful, it was frantic. He bounced from Belgium to England to the United States, burning through friendships and allies. He carried letters, secrets, and a head full of theories that were starting to catch the attention of generals. And as he stepped onto American soil, a refugee and rising legend, one question followed him everywhere. Did Albert Einstein just bring the future with him? Or the end of the world? Before he shattered the laws of physics, Albert Einstein broke the patience of almost every adult around him. Born on March 14th, 1879, in the sleepy German city of Ulm, there was nothing immediately legendary about baby Albert, unless you count the fact that his own grandmother thought he looked so fat, it was almost comical. And from the very beginning, something seemed off. He didn't speak his first full sentence until he was nearly 4 years old. His parents worried he was developmentally delayed. He rarely spoke at all, and when he did, it was slow, deliberate, and under his breath, as if he was testing the words before committing to them. This became known as Einstein's echo, a childhood quirk that unnerved teachers and made classmates stare. Years later, psychologists would retroactively speculate he may have been on the autism spectrum, though that's never been confirmed. What is confirmed is that from a very early age, Albert lived almost entirely inside his own mind. And what a mind it was, strange, vivid, and dangerously curious. As a child, Einstein became obsessed with invisible forces. A pocket compass, given to him when he was 5, shook him to his core. The needle's mysterious pull toward north wasn't just cool, it was unbelievable. He would later describe it as a miracle, and it haunted him for years. What force could move something without touching it? That tiny compass may as well have been the Big Bang of modern physics. But school? School was a nightmare. Einstein was sent to a strict Catholic elementary school in Munich, where discipline mattered more than creativity, and blind obedience was praised as a virtue. He hated it. The rigid structure, the rote memorization, the stiff uniforms. He felt like a prisoner. Teachers didn't appreciate his constant questioning, his refusal to accept authority without explanation, and his complete disinterest in whatever lesson they were trying to beat into him. One teacher allegedly told him, "You will never amount to anything." Another, "Your mere presence undermines respect in the classroom." Einstein didn't argue. He just stared out the window, thinking about light. At home, his parents weren't always sure what to make of him either. His mother, Pauline, was a talented pianist who dreamed her son would become a violinist. She made him practice for hours, and for years he resisted. He didn't even like music, not until his early teens, when he discovered the elegance of Mozart. Then, suddenly, something clicked. He stopped reading sheet music and started improvising. By 13, he could play entire sonatas by ear. Even then, his brain wasn't following the rules. It was reconstructing them. But the academic world still didn't know what to do with a boy like Einstein. At 16, he tried to enter the prestigious Swiss Federal Polytechnic in Zurich and failed the entrance exam. Let's repeat that slowly. Albert Einstein failed the entrance exam. He passed the math and physics sections with ease, of course, scored higher than anyone else, in fact, but bombed out on language, history, and botany. The school told him to go back to high school and try again next year. He did. He passed. But not before leaving behind the country of his birth entirely. At 15, with no diploma, no degree, and no real plan, he dropped out of school and left Germany without telling his headmaster, a move that would get most teenagers grounded for life. For Einstein, it was just another step toward building his own reality. His early academic record was a mess. His transcripts were unimpressive, and to his family's growing concern, he couldn't land a job after graduation. This is the part of the story that people tend to skip over because it doesn't fit the myth. Einstein wasn't a child prodigy. He wasn't the top of his class, and for a long time, he wasn't even employed. He spent years living off scraps, tutoring rich kids, mooching off family, and writing letters to professors practically begging for a position, any position. Most never wrote back. But what nobody knew, not yet, was that during these aimless, chaotic years, Einstein wasn't just sitting in coffee shops whining about life. He was thinking, deeply, constantly, obsessively. He was running thought experiments that would later redefine the entire nature of time and space. In his head, he was chasing beams of light, bending them around corners, imagining what clocks looked like at the speed of sound. He didn't have a lab. He didn't need one. His mind was the lab. This wasn't the story of a genius waiting to be discovered. It was the story of a revolutionary slowly building a weapon, a brain bomb, that the world wasn't ready for. By the time Albert Einstein graduated from the Polytechnic in Zurich in 1900, he should have had the world at his feet. He had the degree, the ambition, the hunger to change the world. What he didn't have was a job, or references, or really anyone who wanted to deal with him. Because Einstein had a reputation. Not the good kind. Professors at the Polytechnic found him brilliant, yes, but also difficult, arrogant, and annoyingly skeptical of authority. He skipped classes to work on problems that weren't assigned. He interrupted lectures with questions most people didn't even understand. He once publicly corrected a professor mid-lesson, not a great-looking turn-of-the-century academia. When it came time for job recommendations, the faculty pretty much blacklisted him. One professor wrote a reference that essentially said, "This guy is smart, but I wouldn't hire him." So, for nearly 2 soul-crushing years, Einstein drifted. He wrote to every school, lab, and university he could find, offering to teach, to assist, to do anything. Nobody responded. He was 21 years old, brilliant, broke, and increasingly bitter. But while the academic world rejected him, one person didn't. Mileva Merrick, a fellow student at the Polytechnic, and Einstein's intellectual equal, romantic partner, and eventual storm of chaos. Mileva was Serbian, brilliant, and one of the very few women studying science at the time. The two of them bonded over physics, philosophy, and their mutual distaste for professors. They fell into a deep, intense, and occasionally destructive love. Their letters, hundreds of them, reveal a connection that was both romantic and fiercely cerebral. They debated Newton, discussed thermodynamics, even co-wrote early research together. Some historians still argue about how much of Einstein's early work Mileva may have contributed to. Her name never appeared on his papers, but her influence? Undeniable. Meanwhile, Einstein's family hated the relationship. Mileva wasn't Jewish. She wasn't wealthy. And she wasn't obedient. Whatever that meant in 1901. Pauline Einstein, Albert's mother, reportedly said, "She is a book like you, but you need a wife." Regardless, the couple pressed on, and Albert pressed on with his job hunt, growing more desperate by the month. Then, finally, in 1902, salvation arrived in the most unglamorous form imaginable, a low-level job at the Swiss Patent Office in Bern. It wasn't a university. It wasn't a lab. It wasn't prestigious or exciting. It was a desk job, 9 to 5. reviewing inventions and legal claims. A bureaucratic purgatory. And Einstein loved it, because in that tiny, cramped office, with no pressure to publish, no lectures to attend, and no professors breathing down his neck, he was finally free to do what he had always done best: think. He nicknamed it his worldly cloister. While the city bustled outside, Einstein sat in silence, surrounded by stacks of technical drawings, and let his mind roam through the universe. Every night after work, he met with a small group of friends, a kind of salon they called the Olympia Academy, where they devoured philosophy, physics, and obscure scientific papers late into the night. No rules, no structure, just curiosity. But back at home, things were far less poetic. Einstein and Mileva were now living together in secret. In 1902, she gave birth to a daughter, Liesel, in Serbia, a child lost to history. We don't know what happened to her. She may have died of scarlet fever. She may have been given up for adoption. Einstein never publicly acknowledged her existence, and no official records survive. It's one of the most haunting blanks in his biography, a ghost of a life that history left behind. Eventually, Albert and Mileva would marry. They'd have 2 sons. But the cracks were already showing. Einstein, despite his genius, was not built for domestic life. He was messy, emotionally distant, and increasingly obsessed with the problems swirling inside his mind. Problems like, what happens to time at the speed of light? How do observers in different frames of reference perceive motion? Can Newton's universe explain everything? Spoiler, it couldn't. And in 1905, Einstein would prove it. But for now, in his cramped apartment above a Bernian street, surrounded by babies, unpaid bills, and mountains of rejection letters, the young man with no job prospects and a missing daughter was about to unleash a scientific revolution that would tear reality itself into pieces. Because sometimes, when the world shuts the door on you, you build a new one with the laws of physics. It's 1905. Albert Einstein is 26 years old. He's married, underpaid, exhausted, and working a mind-numbing clerical job in a Swiss patent office where he spends most of his day rubber-stamping ideas less creative than his breakfast cereal. By any metric, he's a nobody. But something's brewing. Something no one sees coming. Not even Einstein's closest friends. Not his mentors. Not the gatekeepers of the scientific establishment. Because in his so-called spare time, the few quiet hours left after changing diapers, dodging debt, and making polite conversation at dinner, Einstein is secretly rewriting the rules of the known universe. And in a span of just 7 months, in what history now calls his Annus Mirabilis, the miracle year, he will publish 4 scientific papers that will explode classical physics and rip the scientific world out of the 19th century. Let's break them down, because yes, they're complex, but when you strip the math away, what's left is raw, beautiful rebellion. Paper number 1. On a heuristic viewpoint concerning the production and transformation of light. Translation? Einstein revives the long-dismissed idea that light might come in particles, not just waves. He's not just describing the photoelectric effect, he's resurrecting the idea of quantum physics before the field even has a name. Decades later, this paper will earn him the Nobel Prize. Not relativity, not E equals mc squared, but this. Why? Because he's telling the world, what you thought you understood about light. Wrong. Paper number 2. On the motion of small particles suspended in stationary liquids. He uses Brownian motion, the jittery movement of particles in fluid, to give hard, mathematical proof that atoms actually exist. At the time, not everyone was convinced. This one paper helped crush that debate. Invisible things were now provably real. Look closer, Einstein says, and you'll see the whole world moving. Paper number 3. On the electrodynamics of moving bodies. Now it gets wild. This is the birth of special relativity. Einstein obliterates centuries of assumptions about time and space. He argues that there is no absolute time, that time slows down depending on how fast you're moving. The faster you go, the slower time ticks. He's not tweaking Newton's laws. He's killing them. Time and space? Not fixed. Not universal. Not safe. The speed of light is constant. Einstein says, but time isn't. Paper number 4. Does the inertia of a body depend upon its energy content? Just a few pages. Barely any equations. But it ends with the quietest detonation in science. E equals mc squared. One of the most famous equations in history, and maybe the most dangerous. It says that mass and energy are two forms of the same thing. A tiny amount of matter can be converted into a massive amount of energy. And while Einstein doesn't know it yet, he's just written the recipe for the atomic bomb. Let's be clear, these 4 papers didn't come from a tenured professor, a world-class lab, or a university department. They came from a guy working a day job, with no access to a laboratory, no formal academic title, and no institutional support. He wasn't a professor. He wasn't famous. He was a clerk. And in one miraculous year, the world would never be the same. At first, nothing. The scientific community doesn't know what to do with this unknown name in an obscure physics journal. The math is radical, the concepts unnerving. He's not part of the club. But then the whispers start. Physicists begin to notice that this Einstein guy is onto something. 1, then 2, then dozens begin to realize. These aren't just smart papers, they're revolutionary. Suddenly, Einstein is invited to speak, to publish, to collaborate. The outsider is becoming unavoidable. In 1908, just 3 years later, he finally lands a teaching position. In 1909, he gets a full professorship in Zurich. The boy who couldn't get a recommendation letter is now giving lectures to packed halls. But he's not done. He's never done. Special relativity, that was only part of the puzzle. There's still gravity. There's still the question of how space curves, how mass bends time itself. And for the next decade, Einstein will work through a new theory, one so radical and mind-bending that he'll doubt himself more than once, break friendships over it, and push his mind to the absolute brink. But back in 1905, the world doesn't see that yet. All it sees is a quiet man with a paper trail of pure chaos, redefining light, time, energy, and matter itself. He's not just solving equations anymore. He's remaking reality. By 1915, Albert Einstein was famous, in very specific circles. He'd published his theory of special relativity a decade earlier, and it had shaken up physics classrooms across Europe, but it was still just that. A theory. A paper. A stack of words and equations with no experimental proof. Einstein knew it wasn't enough. Something was still missing: gravity. The problem? Newton's laws of gravity worked, but not perfectly. They couldn't explain certain anomalies in planetary orbits. They couldn't account for how gravity might interact with light. Einstein was convinced the answers lay in a deeper truth, a general theory of relativity that would explain not just how objects moved, but how space and time themselves curved around mass. This was his obsession, and it nearly destroyed him. Einstein spent 10 years working on the problem, spiraling into one of the most difficult, isolating, creatively agonizing periods of his life. He lost weight. He stopped sleeping. He nearly lost his mind chasing a single equation, one that could bend the fabric of reality itself. Meanwhile, his personal life was unraveling. His marriage to Mileva Merrick, already strained, was crumbling. She had followed him from city to city, raised their 2 children largely on her own, and watched as he grew increasingly cold and emotionally detached. Einstein, by this point, was having an affair, not discreetly, not occasionally, but regularly, with his cousin Elsa Lowenthal. Yes, his cousin. The affair turned public, ugly, and eventually final. Einstein demanded a separation from Mileva and offered her a bizarre, contractual agreement. If she stayed married to him and kept the peace, he'd give her the Nobel Prize money if, and when, he won it. She accepted. They divorced in 1919. That same year, he married Elsa. And as all of this played out like the messiest academic soap opera in Europe, Einstein finally solved the puzzle. In late 1915, he submitted his new theory of general relativity, a bold, mind-bending explanation of gravity that said, mass doesn't pull on objects, it bends space-time. Picture it like this. Space isn't empty. It's a soft, invisible fabric. When you put something heavy on it, a planet, a star, the fabric dips. Things nearby roll toward the dip. That's gravity. The math was beautiful. The logic was revolutionary. But without proof, it was still just another theory. Then came 1919, a total solar eclipse. British astronomer Arthur Eddington led an expedition to test one of Einstein's predictions, that light from distant stars should bend as it passed near the sun, pulled by the sun's warped spacetime. And when the photographic plates were developed, the stars had moved, just as Einstein predicted. The confirmation exploded across front pages worldwide. Revolution in science. Einstein's theory triumphs. Lights all askew in the heavens. Overnight, Einstein became a global phenomenon. Let's pause here. Einstein was the first scientist in modern history to become famous the way movie stars and politicians are famous. His name became shorthand for genius. His face, that wild shock of hair, those thoughtful eyes, was instantly iconic. Cartoons, posters, books, speeches, interviews. Everywhere he went, cameras followed. Crowds gathered. Reporters chased him through train stations just to ask, "What is relativity?" He would often reply, "If you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it yourself." But fame is rarely free. And for Einstein, it became a curse. Behind the accolades was a rising tide of hatred. In post-World War I Germany, Einstein was a Jew, a pacifist, and a celebrated internationalist, 3 things that painted a massive target on his back. Nationalists called his theories un-German. Right-wing newspapers ran anti-Semitic editorials slamming Jewish physics. He received death threats. Nazi sympathizers openly plotted against him. One paper even ran an obituary for Einstein while he was still alive. By the early 1920s, he was traveling constantly, giving lectures in London, Paris, Tokyo, Jerusalem. He met kings and emperors, spoke at the League of Nations, helped found the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He'd become not just a scientific figure, but a moral one, asked to speak out on war, on Zionism, on justice, even on God. And while the world projected meaning onto him, Einstein was quietly falling apart. His second marriage, to Elsa, was distant and strange. He continued having affairs. His relationship with his children, especially his first son, Hans Albert, was complicated and cold. His younger son, Eduard, would later be diagnosed with schizophrenia and institutionalized. Einstein visited rarely. He loved the abstract, particles, light, elegant equations. But people were messier. He once wrote, "I am truly a lone traveler and have never belonged to my country, my home, my friends, or even my immediate family. I have never lost a need for solitude." Still, the world kept calling. In 1922, he finally won the Nobel Prize in Physics, not for relativity, ironically, but for his earlier work on the photoelectric effect. True to his word, he gave the prize money to Mileva, his first wife, who used it to care for their children. That same year, a German nationalist assassinated his friend and foreign minister Walther Rathenau. Einstein began carrying a pistol for protection. By the late 1920s, Einstein was both revered and reviled. He was offered university posts he didn't ask for. His lectures were mobbed by fans and heckled by extremists. His theories became battlegrounds in cultural wars he wanted no part of. And still he worked. He began chasing a new obsession, the unified field theory, a holy grail attempt to connect gravity and electromagnetism into one grand theory. He would spend the rest of his life searching for it. He would never find it, because by the 1930s, the world had stopped being a place of theory. It was becoming a place of violence. And Albert Einstein, the pacifist, the Jew, the scientist who cracked the universe, was about to become the most hunted intellectual in Europe. By 1933, Einstein was a man at war with the world, not by choice, but by survival. Germany had fallen. Adolf Hitler had risen. And one of the first intellectuals the Nazis targeted wasn't a politician or a journalist. It was Albert Einstein. They called his theories degenerate Jewish science. They ransacked his home. They seized his bank account. The Nazis even publicly auctioned off his sailboat. A photograph of Einstein appeared in a fascist magazine under the caption, "Not yet hanged." Einstein, stunned by how fast the country had collapsed into madness, fled. He left Europe with just a suitcase and his notebooks. Maliva was left behind. So was Edouard, his institutionalized son. Einstein would never see either of them again. His departure wasn't just an exile, it was an escape. A Nobel laureate, stateless and adrift, watching his homeland turn into a machine for mass murder. He landed in the United States in 1933, accepted a position at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey, a quiet academic haven where he could finally live in peace. But peace didn't last long. In 1939, Einstein received a visit from fellow physicist Leo Szilard, a Hungarian refugee who came bearing terrifying news. German scientists were working on a nuclear chain reaction. If they succeeded, Hitler would have the world's first atomic bomb. Einstein, horrified, knew it was possible. He had laid the theoretical foundation years earlier with E equals mc squared, the equation that proved mass could be turned into enormous energy. In theory, a tiny amount of uranium could flatten a city. For years, Einstein had been a committed pacifist, refusing to support any military research, denouncing war in all forms. But now, he signed his name to a letter, a single page that would change the course of history. The Einstein-Szilard letter. Written in secret and delivered directly to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, the letter warned that Nazi Germany might soon develop nuclear weapons and urged the US government to begin a weapons program of its own, just in case. Roosevelt read it. He listened, and the Manhattan Project was born. But here's the twist. Einstein himself was never asked to join the project. The US military didn't trust him. He was German. He was outspoken. He had a long paper trail of pacifism, civil rights activism, and anti-fascist statements. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, considered him a potential security threat. They compiled a 1,400-page file on him. So while others, Oppenheimer, Fermi, Teller, raced to build the bomb in secret labs, Einstein was left on the sidelines, in Princeton, haunted by what he had helped unleash. Then, in August 1945, the world changed again. 2 atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Over 200,000 people died, civilians, children, shadows burned into concrete. Einstein heard the news on the radio. His reaction? He put his head in his hands and said only, "Woe is me." He would spend the rest of his life trying to undo what his theories had made possible. He gave speeches. He wrote letters. He founded organizations warning of nuclear proliferation. He partnered with Bertrand Russell and other intellectuals to draft the Russell-Einstein Manifesto, urging world leaders to pull back from the brink of annihilation. But he knew it was too late. The genie was out. The theory he had scribbled down in 1905, elegant, simple, revolutionary, had become the blueprint for extinction. And Einstein wasn't just warning the world about physics anymore. He was warning it about itself. In these final decades, Einstein became more than just a scientist. He became a symbol, and that symbol came with weight. He campaigned for civil rights, joining the NAACP, publicly denouncing American racism, and even offering support to Paul Robeson and W.E.B. Du Bois when they were blacklisted. He called segregation America's worst disease and refused to speak at universities that enforced it. He turned down offers of power, most famously in 1952 when the government of Israel offered him the presidency. He declined. He said he lacked the political skill, and he wasn't wrong. Einstein was a dreamer, a philosopher, a theorist, not a tactician. He continued his work in Princeton, chasing the elusive unified field theory, trying to stitch together the forces of nature one last time. But the breakthroughs never came. The world had moved on to quantum mechanics, a theory Einstein famously hated, even as it built the computers, the semiconductors, the science fiction future he never wanted. God does not play dice with the universe, he declared. To which physicist Niels Bohr allegedly replied, "Stop telling God what to do." And so Einstein aged, not with bitterness, but with resignation. He walked the Princeton streets in shabby sweaters and worn shoes. He played the violin. He wrote letters. He made tea. He was globally famous and utterly alone. In 1955, at the age of 76, Einstein died quietly in his sleep from an abdominal aneurysm. His final wish was that his body be cremated, his ashes scattered secretly. No shrine, no monument. But the attending doctor ignored one part of the request. He stole Einstein's brain. Literally, preserved it in jars, drove around with it in the trunk of his car for decades. That's how the world treated its greatest mind, with reverence and madness, science and sideshow. Albert Einstein died in 1955, but that was just the beginning. Because the strange truth is, Einstein became far more famous after his death than during his lifetime. Not as a man, but as a symbol, a cartoon, a meme, a god of intellect in a world that barely understood his work. That photo of him sticking out his tongue? That wasn't staged. It was taken on his 72nd birthday after a long night of speeches and interviews. A photographer shouted for one more picture. He was tired, annoyed, and being treated like a circus act, so he made a face, a moment of rebellion. But the image outlived him by decades, slapped on t-shirts, posters, mugs. E equals MC squared became shorthand for smart guy. But who he really was, that got lost. Einstein hated nationalism, but countries fought over him. He didn't believe in God in the traditional sense, but religious leaders quoted him. He warned against atomic weapons, but his equation was tattooed on bomb casings. He rejected authority, but became the face of academic institutions he wouldn't have fit into as a young man. Even his brain, dissected, photographed, and pickled in jars by a rogue pathologist, became a kind of holy relic. Scientists sliced it into over 200 pieces, hoping to find some anatomical proof of genius. Some claimed his parietal lobe was unusually large. Others found nothing, as if cutting up the man would explain his mind. But you can't dissect wonder. You can't quantify why a man with no resources, no power, and no connections could stare into the fabric of space and time and see the flaw. Or why he trusted his thoughts more than textbooks. Or why he believed, to his dying breath, that the universe had order, even if human beings did not. Einstein was never trying to be famous. He wasn't trying to be rich. He wasn't even trying to be right. What he wanted was understanding. He once said, "I want to know God's thoughts. The rest are details." But the God he imagined wasn't one of commandments or creeds. It was a mind, a structure, a grand logic behind the chaos. And in chasing that logic, Einstein became something far stranger than a genius. He became a mirror. We saw in him what we wanted to see: wisdom, rebellion, humility, power, peace. But beneath it all was a man who never quite felt at home. Not in Germany, not in America, not in academia, not in family, not even in his own fame. He once wrote, "The individual feels more than ever dependent on society, but it is not felt in the positive sense. It is more like a helpless state of being crushed." He loved solitude, loved sailing alone, loved silence. And in that silence, he found ideas no one else could see. Einstein didn't just change science, he humanized it. He showed that thinking wasn't cold, robotic, or elitist. It could be playful. It could start with a compass, a beam of light, or a simple question no one else bothered to ask. He gave the world permission to wonder, even in a world that rewards obedience. Today, we use his work every second of our lives. GPS, lasers, nuclear energy, even the Big Bang Theory itself is rooted in his equations. He helped decode the universe. And yet, Einstein was deeply skeptical of where we'd take it. He warned of technological arrogance. He feared the moral decay of politics. He called for peace, for education, for empathy, and was ignored just enough to make his legacy feel like a warning. And maybe that's what makes him eternal. Because Einstein was never just a physicist. He was the question that never stops asking. Why? Why does light move the same speed for everyone? Why does time bend? Why does energy have mass? Why can't we live in peace, even when we know how? Those questions still echo. In classrooms, in laboratories, in lonely minds staring out of train windows wondering how the stars work. Albert Einstein never wanted to be a legend. He wanted to understand. And in doing so, he made the rest of us try. Even now, decades after his death, we're still chasing the light beam he ran after as a child, and we're still not caught up.